Darren Wilson for the shooting death of Michael Brown. With us now, Democratic representative from New York, Gregory Meeks. And on Capitol Hill, former special assistant to President Obama, Joshua Dubois. Congressman, let me start with you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Joe.
Let me ask you, wait, I'm sure you've thought about it an awful lot. New York obviously had a terrible incident that happened out on Staten Island. There were protests, but they were peaceful protests. Very charged protests, but very peaceful. That's not happening in Ferguson. What's the difference? What's the difference with Ferguson right now and where New York and other communities are across the country?
Well, number one, I think there's a lot of bent-up frustration in Ferguson. Though no one, as the president, and as particularly as Mr. Brown has indicated, no one wants violence. Violence should not occur. A number of individuals that were out there last night, in fact, there was a number of protests that were nonviolent in Ferguson.
Right. And protests across the country also nonviolent.
That is correct. Yeah. But I think that people are upset. This is a decision that folks do not understand, and there's questions in regards to this particular prosecutor. I'm a former prosecutor. Do you have
questions? Do you have questions about the process?
Well, yeah, I have questions in whether or not this prosecutor really wanted an indictment. And I think that's clear.
Why do you say that?
Well, because generally when you take a case to the grand jury, at the conclusion of the case, the prosecutor asks for an indictment. And from everything that I've gotten thus far from the transcript, this prosecutor never asked for an indictment. You're only talking about generally when you take a case to the grand jury, giving the grand jury the issues so that you can show that there's probable cause to believe that a crime was committed.
Yeah.
Did not do that in this case, and that's why it took an extraordinary amount of time. And so it seemed as though the prosecutor went into the grand jury wanting an outcome, and that outcome being a no true bill.
Joshua, we've been talking about the range of options that the grand jury had as they made their decision, as it came out yesterday, from first-degree murder, which was going to be a tough one, but even to involuntary manslaughter. And again, for the grand jury, all they had to find was probable cause for something like that. Are you surprised then by the outcome?
I am surprised and just deeply, not only disappointed, but really it's a disconcerting feeling waking up in a country, and a lot of black folks are waking up this way this morning, feeling like maybe your life does not matter as much as someone else's. And whether you believe that that's the case or not, that's something that should affect all of us as Americans. The prosecutor's tone last night was all wrong. It felt like Michael Brown was the suspect there, and Darren Wilson was his defense client rather than the other way around. You also have a case where it was finally confirmed that Brown's body was 130 feet away from Darren Wilson. And a lot of black folks are thinking this morning, you know, even if he was turning towards him, the fact is he was unarmed. And isn't there another way to handle that situation other than shooting this young man dead? And so it really feels like we've given license that when a person is intimidated by a black person in this country, you can pull out your gun and shoot them. And that's very disconcerting.
Gene Robinson, off of what was just said, you have children, grown children now,
yeah,
but talk about the inherent difficulty that white people in this country will just never get, no matter how much we talk about it, about black parents raising children and having to tell them at a certain age to be aware of traffic stops, things like that.
Yeah, no, and how many times have we talked about this, Mike? You know, but you have to talk with your children, with your sons especially, and you tell them, be polite and keep your hands in sight, and don't talk in an aggressive tone to police officers, because it could be a matter of life and death. And this is, and it's just frustrating to have to bring this up again and again, because these things keep happening. And as Joshua said, if you're a white person in this country and you feel intimidated by a black person, it seems that our system is saying, shoot first and worry about consequences later.
Let me jump in here, though, and I am loath to jump in here as a guy from the South who went to a Southern and a state school. I am loath to jump in here, but I do have to jump in here and say the evidence before the grand jury did have Michael Brown going into the police car and swinging and hitting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't in the grand jury room. I'm not here defending anything that has happened. I'm just putting that out there, that this wasn't Trayvon Martin, where he's walking across a residential neighborhood with Skittles in his pocket and some guy decides that because he's black, he's going to confront him, and Trayvon Martin ends up dead. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
I mean,
You're right, Joe, that this is different. This is different from that. But at the same time, if conflicting testimony about what actually happened, and there was conflicting testimony about what actually happened, if that is, prima facie evidence that there shouldn't be even charges, then and let a jury decide, that we're just going to have to let a whole lot of people out of jail, right? Because there's often conflicting testimony.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judge.
I said at the 6 o'clock hour, along with Gene, that there were a lot of questions to be asked about how this entire grand jury was set up, and it didn't go the way that a lot of grand juries go.
And if I could just jump in for a second, the other factor to consider is now we have pictures of Officer Darren Wilson, and we've gone from a situation where folks thought he was brutally assaulted to photos that show someone who looked like they just came from a mild paintball game. I mean, this man, obviously, maybe he was in some sort of a tussle, but the question is, should that tussle have resulted in him pulling out a gun at 130 feet and dumping 12 bullets into someone?
Yeah.
And a lot of folks are just wondering about that.
And that is a question that in most grand juries, if you didn't have the prosecutor playing defense attorney and prosecutor, congressman, that's something that would be heard in the court of law, but we're not going there because, again, this grand jury wasn't set up like most grand juries, which is to indict.
And that's why you have people upset all across this country, because transparency would not happen, and it looks as though that justice would not happen. And what Mr. Du Bois was talking about earlier, I mean, just the recent case here in New York, because this is happening all across this country, where you've had a young man that was shot in the stairwell and then if you have the police commissioner say that was by accident when it was a kill shot, then that tells folks that if you are young and you happen to be African American and male, then your life is valueless.
So, Gregory, you're a prosecutor, right?
Yes.
Have you ever seen a grand jury go down like this, where you actually had a prosecutor go in and play it as down the middle as he played it, instead of doing what prosecutors do, which is, I mean, we all know prosecutors, they're aggressive. They want to indict, and then they want to convict, and if they can't convict, they want to get the best sentence they can get.
Joe, I have never, ever, and what I did before coming on last night, figuring maybe I hadn't prosecuted a case in a long time, I called a few of my friends who are prosecutors today. Yeah. And they said they have never, ever seen a situation like this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it, Congressman. It's always great to see you. Josh, thank you so much.